Joining me via telephone, ladies and gentlemen, is near-death experiencer and author Alice Adamek. Alice, welcome to Real Spiritual Talk Radio.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
I'm also glad you decided to come on and share your experience. Now, I realize your experience was extremely informative as it concerns the nature of spirituality. But tell us what it was like prior to your near-death experience concerning any religious belief systems you may have had as a child, for example, on the topic of religion and or spirituality.
Well, that's easy. My whole family is very Jesus-oriented and Bible-oriented. As far as they're concerned, there was no holy men, no nothing before the Bible and Jesus. And so during my childhood, I went to the Lutheran, Methodist, Baptist, Mormon, all these different churches because we moved around a lot, and a lot of them didn't have but one church. And anyway, so my belief system was just strictly, Jesus. That's all there was. And I found out that that's not true. There are a lot of holy men out there, or have been and are.
So in other words, you were a well-rounded Protestant.
Absolutely, yeah.
Now, did your belief systems ever change as you got older, or did you continue to practice what your parents taught?
No, as I got older, I started, thinking about why is there so many different things and each church is trying to get to the same place. Tell me or show me or let me know why, there's so much difference in each church. And I finally realized that it's because of all the man-made laws that they shove into the churches and their beliefs. It's not God's law, and it's not, the holy men trying to help them to get to where they're going. It's their man-made laws, like certain religion, you can't wear skirts above the knee, or you can't wear mega. Well, in reality, the source, or God, or the energy, it doesn't matter. That part is all physical, it's all man-made. So, yeah, I learned that in my 20s and 30s. I finally separated what was man-made laws and what was God's law. And there's such a huge difference.
Yes, and I understand your statement clearly. Many times under my own comment sections, I get individuals of an evangelical faith posting tons of scripture, attempting to persuade others that their way of interpreting scripture, for example, is the only way to read the Bible or understand the nature of God. So I get what you mean by man-made perceptions in religion. But why don't we move forward? Tell us how your near-death experience came about.
Well, we were on vacation out at the Outer Banks, and every year the whole family, there was like 12 couples, we'd all rent one of these huge mansions and stay a week, and everybody took turns cooking. It was just a great vacation every year. And this year I went out there, and I was feeling kind of funky anyway, and I got in there, and the first couple that were to fix dinner, they were busy working, and they finally fixed their dinner. And I was hurting really bad. I had indigestion, something terrible. And my back hurt, and they said dinner was ready, and I went up and sat down, and I couldn't eat. And Christy, one of my nieces, she says, well, I'll fix you something, Auntie. She said, I'll fix you some chicken soup. So she did, and she brought it out, and I took one bite, and oh my gosh, I ran for the stairs. And it was like you go down the stairs and there's a little foyer, and then you run down the stairs again and there's another foyer, and then you open the doors and you're outside and you run down another bunch of stairs. Anyway, I made it down to the first landing, and I said, I'm going to be sick. And I don't know who did it, but they brought me a trash can. And I definitely did a duty on that trash can, and they called the ambulance, and they took me from there down to Hogshead Hospital. And that doctor, she was something else. And I said, I need pain pills now. Yeah, and the nurses and stuff told them, that I had been diagnosed out in the other room with esophagitis or something like that. Anyway, she says, esophagitis, she says, this lady's having a full-blown granddaddy of them all heart attack. She says, get that blankety-blank helicopter in here. And so they flew me up to Virginia Beach, Virginia cardiac unit. And I guess that's where everything started, because I apparently died coming off the gurney out of the helicopter. And then on the operating table, I died 2 or 3 more times. My heart kept stopping, and they were having a heck of a time keeping it going. And one of those times, I was gone for like 4 or 5 minutes. And that's when I had the experience where I came out of my body and looked down, and there's a white room with all these doctors and nurses and stuff in there, and they were all running around doing the thing. And I was looking down. There was no more pain. Oh, it was so wonderful. There was no more pain.
Sounds like you had an out-of-body experience. Why don't you tell us what happened after this?
Okay. Well, they were running around trying to, get my heart and everything working again. And I was standing there looking down, and all of a sudden I felt these arms under my arms, and I looked to the side, and there was like these see-through people. They were glittery, beautiful people, and you could see through them. And so they turned me around, and we started walking, and it was like everything was so bright that there was one right in the middle. It was brighter than the rest of it, and they started walking me towards that. And so I looked back and I thought, yeah, goodbye. I don't want any more of that pain. Anyway, so they kept walking me. And of course, there's a whole story of where we went and the things that we saw, on the way up. And then once I got up, where they were taking me. And in my book, I tell people, all the things that I saw and what happened, and, how the rainbow tastes, how the wind feels, like a material. And, all the different things that you feel after you're out of your body. It's just miraculous. You're no longer contained in a skull. Your brain is absolutely wide open. You know everything. Anything you want to know, you just ask and it's there. Anyway, they kept walking me, and all of a sudden they stopped. And then they sort of disappeared, the little chickens. Anyway, they disappeared. And in front of me stood this guy. He was about 6'3", 6'4", maybe 20-foot white wingspan. And he had mounds of blonde, beautiful, curly hair, black eyelashes, big blue eyes, muscular. And in his hands, he held a little tiny pair of shears. And I looked up at him and I said, well, who do you think you are? Because I'm a pretty smart alecky type person. And I said, who do you think you are? And he says, you probably wouldn't recognize me. He says, because on Earth, he says, you have the black cape over a skeleton with a sickle. And he says, and he says, you call him the Green Ripper. He says, but I am the Grim Reaper. And I just kind of giggled and I said, no, you're not. And he says, yes, I am. And I said, well, what's with the little tiny shears? I said, that's goofy looking. And he said, well, I want you to look down. So I looked down, and there was this brilliantly bright silver cord from around my belly button down to this hospital area with this person laying on the bed. And as I looked at that person, it was me. And I said, oh. And he says, well, he says, right now you're an entity of the earth and you're an entity of here. And he says, and until I cut the cord, he says, you're both places. And I said, oh, that makes sense. Clear as mud to me. Anyway, he says, I asked him, I says, well, can you go ahead and cut it? I says, I really like it up here because of all the experiences that I had getting to him. I really, it was beautiful. We don't have any words to describe it at all. Anyway, I said, go ahead and cut it. Come on, you can cut it. And he says, no. He says, I have to take orders just like everybody else. And he says, and I said, well, what is that silver cord thing anyway? And he says, well, when you're conceived in your mother, he says, you have a cord that leads from you to your mother. And he says, and in, in a 3 months, he says, you get a piece of what we call a puzzle. It's a huge jigsaw puzzle, it looks like. And it's what you guys call God, or, the power, the energy. And he says, and then a little piece of that comes into the little fetus that's in your mother. And he says, now you're beginning to be an entity of God and of the earth. And he says, so, now when you're born, he says, they clip that cord. He says, now you're no longer an entity of your mother. He says, you are an entity of earth. It's just you and earth, and you're here to experience and do whatever it takes to fulfill your karma so that when you go back up into heaven or wherever we were at, he says, all those memories and everything go into what we call the memory box. It's actually your soul. The spirit part is God. The soul is where the memories go, and your mind and body, of course, what they do. So anyway, he says, and then he says, then when you die, he says, I'm the one that has to cut the cord that leads from you here to the body down there. And he says, and once I clip that, he says, you're no longer an entity of earth, you're an entity of here. And that's when I kept telling him to cut it. And he says, no, he says, I can't. And he says, here, he says, I want to show you. And I says, what? And he says, look down. So I looked down. And there was the bright silvery cord, connected to the person on the table. But there was a bunch of gray ones going down that were connected to me. And I said, what are those? And he says, those are lifetimes and memories that you had before you got here. And I said, oh, great. And I said, what? I said, can I go down and see what it was? And he says, well, you can pick one. He says, but I'm going to tell you, he says, don't go into the body that is hooked to that gray cord. He says, you can hover above it, you can see what's going on and everything. He says, but don't go into it. And I said, well, okay, I can do that. So it was like I was floating, and I went into this one little cord thing and went down, and it was there was a pharaoh and his wife and me and a baby. And I said, I'm watching this, and the baby was horribly deformed. And the pharaoh and his wife were brother and sister, so I'm sure that's why the baby was all messed up. Anyway, I was really, really tall. I looked like, what's that guy on Addams Family? Lurch. Yeah, Lurch. I looked like Lurch, I was really tall, very straight-faced, everything. And I took the baby and I took him into this room, and I had a little bottle with milk, and I had to put cobra venom in it. And then I fed that bottle to the baby, and the baby passed. And this was my job back then in that lifetime. That's what I had to do. And I didn't like that. So I come zapping back up. I said, okay, that's enough of that. I don't want any. And he said, but every lifetime you have learned something. And he says, you've learned a lot about babies in this lifetime. And he says, and that's part of it, because you've had to make up for all of that and all those little souls and entities that couldn't, reach adulthood because they had to die. So, and I told him, I said, well, I've got 2 children, 2 adult children. And I said, but I've had 11 pregnancies. Is that why? And he says, yeah. He says, you were paying off karma. And I said, I don't believe in karma, and I don't believe in reincarnation. I said, my family is strictly, Christian, and if you believe in that stuff, you're a terrible person. That's Eastern religion, and it's just not right, So, and he says, and I told him, I said, well, and each one of these is a reincarnation, each gray tube thingy. And he says, yes. He says, it is. And he says, and in this lifetime, he says, you still have some things left to do. He says, so you can't stay here. And he says, but, he says, before you go, he says, you have to go with and I can't remember what he called them. It was those see-through people. And he said, you have to go with them, and they'll take you somewhere, and there's going to be somebody that, can answer all of your questions. And I said, okay, I'm ready. So the 2 see-through people brought me to this room, and it was really weird because it wasn't a room. It was like clouds, but it was in the form of a room, and the chair looked like a cloud, and I sat down, and then I heard this wonderful, beautiful voice in it. And anyway, I said, well, who is this? And they said, this is your source. And I said, my source? They said, yeah, you can ask questions, you can do, whatever you want, and we'll try to guide you on to the next step of your life. So I said, okay. So I started asking questions, and that's what my book is about, is all the questions that I ask. So.
Well, this is a very fascinating near-death experience, which poses many questions. So first, we established that you had an out-of-body experience, which kickstarted this whole thing. Then you're in another realm, standing before an entity holding a pair of shears, who labels itself as what we call the Grim Reaper, to which you have a cord attached from your spiritual body all the way back down into the hospital. Now, the question of where life begins can also be posed here. Many say in the womb, at birth, etc. But this entity says to you that a piece of God or God's spirit must enter into the fetus at an unspecified time, giving it complete life. And once the fetus is born and the umbilical cord is cut, it is then a product of the world versus a product of its mother. Is that correct?
Yes, definitely. When the mother first conceives, you're just the animal part of the body. You've got the spirit, the mind, you got the body, spirit, and mind, and the soul. And at this time, all you are is the body. You're just the body, and you're growing inside the mother. And until that piece of God or source or whatever you want to call it, I don't know, people all call it different names, but you get a little piece of that put inside of you, and that's the life part. That's what glows. That's what gives you the energy. That's the God part of you. Every one of us has a little piece of that. That's why they say there's good in everybody, because there really is. And then when they say, oh, we're all brothers and sisters, what they're meaning is, yes, we are brothers and sisters because we all have that little spark of life that came from the Maker. So all of us are brother and sister because that's, that's in each one of us. And then after you get that, then you're whole, you're ready. You're just growing and finishing that physical body and the brain and the whole bunch, so that when you're born, they can clip that and you're totally an entity of the earth. So, yeah.
There seems to have been a distinction also between spirit and soul, whereas many believe that the two are interchangeable. But in your near-death experience, you were told that the spirit is that piece of God and the soul is like a spiritual memory bank.
Right, yes. Yeah, see, whatever you do in this lifetime, if you're running around being a bad person or a good person or whatever and you die, all of that is stuffed into your little memory box, your soul. And then when you die, that box is opened. And if all the pieces, like, let's refer back to the jigsaw puzzle. So now they open up that box and your little jigsaw piece fits in almost perfectly, but it has one little bump on the side or something that doesn't quite fit. Whoops. That means you're going to be reincarnated because that little bump represents something. I don't know. Humility. I mean, it could be any number of things that you have to learn, and you can only learn it through the human body. So that's why you have to be reborn. But I lost my train of thought. So that's when you get old.
That's okay. I wanted to stay on the topic of reincarnation anyway. So you learned that there is karma and that the different gray cords connected from you to the different parts of the earth represented reincarnated lives, even though you did not believe in any of this at the time.
Right. I mean, you talk about a shock. When you're raised as a Christian and all that, and you hear this kind of stuff, you kind of got to agree with your parents and your grandparents and all that. It's an Eastern religion, so, is it bad? But after you listen to them and you talk to them and you learn, you realize, hey, there's something to this. And that's what happened to me. I thought, oh my gosh, this is so simple. How come people don't understand this?
Yes. And going back to karma, you were given the validation that karma does indeed exist because you were able to see in detail a past life that you had in ancient Egypt where it was your job to poison children. So this is why you believe you perhaps had to come back and do another one.
Well, yeah. Well, there was other lifetimes too. And I was too chicken to go down into them, because that was such a horrible experience for me. I didn't want to know what other horrible things I'd done, and caused me to have to be reborn to try to fix it.
And I can imagine it's why our memories perhaps get wiped because of the trauma those memories would cause.
Yeah, because how would you survive in a lifetime if you were born and you realized your last lifetime you were Hitler? I mean, even though maybe you're in a female body this time and all that, that memory would mess you up. I mean, just knowing what you did, instead of going on and redoing your karma as you're supposed to, you'd have this hanging around your neck and you wouldn't be able to do what you're supposed to.
Now, you stated that you were dead for about 4 to 5 minutes on the table. And by the way, I just want to let the audience know that you do not refer to this as a near-death experience. What do you call it instead?
It's ADE, after-death experience, because all of this happened after I was totally and completely dead. I mean, they had pronounced me dead already. So, yeah, it's after the death that I experienced all this.
So what was it like coming back into your body?
I didn't come back through the silver cord, which I thought was rather odd because I had heard that that's where you enter and exit and all that. I came back through my head, at the top of my head, and I just kind of slipped in with my feet and slipped down into my body. It was the weirdest thing. I don't even know how to explain it. But I heard, like one of the last things I heard when I died, the first time coming off the helicopter, I heard the lady say, "We're losing her." That was one of the last things I heard. Now, going back into my body after all these experiences, and by the way, yeah, I was only dead for like 4 or 5 minutes, but I swear to you, I crossed my lion heart. I was up there for at least a day. I mean, that's what it felt like, that I was there for a whole day, because it was just so much happened and so much information that it just blew me away.
So time was different there than here, in other words.
Yeah, absolutely different. Yeah. And anyway, when I got back into my body, I thought, the pain is gone. But, those big, huge lights that they have over the top of you when they're operating? There was nobody in the room, but that light, they had put the light down and it was laying on my pelvic bone and my left side. And it was just crushing me. And I must have passed out because when I woke up again, I was in a room. And I had my arms up over my head because it felt so good to put my arms up like that. And I says, okay, I says, what's going on? And my daughter, Sherry, had come up from Florida. She has an office all over the country. She was a big HR person. Anyway, she was down in Florida in her office down there, and my other daughter called her from Colorado and said, Mom's, really sick, blah, blah. So Sherry came up, and the first thing I saw was Sherry's face. And I looked over to her, and I said, what's going on? She says, oh, Mom, she says, you scared the living stuff out of all of us. She says, you died and came back. And I said, I did? And she says, yeah. Anyway, that little episode in the hospital room, they had another lady in there, and Sherry had gone out into the hallway to work on her computer. She was doing her work, only she was doing it on the computer. This lady come over, and she says, you stole my sandwich. And she had a knife in her hand, and she was coming down to stab me, and my daughter came through the door and grabbed her and took the knife away from her, and she was hollering for the nurses and everybody, and they all come in there, and they gathered her up. And anyway, they took her out of my room. And I asked Sherry, I said, Sherry, was I dreaming that, or did that really happen? And she says, oh, Mom, it really happened. She says, she was mad at you. She says, and she had told me earlier that you stole her jewelry, you stole her food, and she was telling the nurses, and the nurses kept telling her, that this lady was unconscious and she couldn't steal anything if she wanted to, but she didn't believe that, and she was going to get rid of me for sure. And anyway, that was kind of exciting. I mean,
yes, drama after returning to let you know you've returned to planet Earth.
Here I am. I went through all that. Now they're going to put me through it again.
Upon coming back from your experience, did you notice any changes within yourself, such as precognition, the lack of fear of death, hearing other people's thoughts, as many near-death experiencers describe?
Yeah, there's no fear of death anymore at all. And you're right about being able to, I can see people's auras now. I can kind of tell you what they're thinking. If I'm really quiet and I'm sitting still, like one of my little episodes, I was in Walmart and this lady was standing there looking at these coats, little boys' coats, and she picked up one that was like a size 4, and I could hear her saying, well, I'm not sure if it's a 4 or if I should get him an 8. And I could see this little boy in her mind, and I said, honey, you need a size 8 for him. And she turned around and looked at me, and she says, what? I said, oh my gosh, I'm sorry. And I just took off, because I was so embarrassed. And then I did it again one other time. Some gal was in the bed bath and whatever, and she was looking at these green wash rags, and there was like 2 or 3 different shades. And she held up one, and she was looking at it, and then another one, and she was visualizing her bathroom, and I could see her bathroom, and I could see the colors that she had in there. And I said, well, I think this one here would probably be the better one for you to put in there. And she said, did I say something? Did I tell you what I was looking for? And I said, oh my gosh. I said, no. I said, I'll see you later. Have a nice day. And I left.
And you were unable to do these things prior to your near-death experience?
No, heck no. No, I couldn't do that at all. But now I have, and I kind of block myself now when I know that I'm kind of like in that mood, if you want to call it that. I kind of back off and put a white light around me so I don't absorb people's thinkings and what they're doing, and because it's hard enough to mess with your own life, let alone somebody else's.
Earlier, you mentioned you grew up in a strict Protestant family. Did you ever attempt to relay your experience to them? And how have you changed from your earlier teachings?
Well, my thinking has changed altogether. It's not anything like what they're doing or thinking or anything else. And my grandfather was a Nazarene preacher. My cousin is a Nazarene preacher. And my cousin went to the Nazarene College. And it's really hard to try to tell people that there's more to it than just Jesus and the Bible. And I asked him, I said, well, if it's just Jesus and the Bible, I said, what did the people do before they were here and before the Bible was written? I says, what about Buddha and Muhammad and Abraham and all these other, holy people? I says, what, How do they fit into the picture? Well, they're not like Jesus in the Bible. No, I'm telling you. So I don't try to explain anything to them because it's like butting your head against a brick wall sometimes. They don't want to hear it, you know. You're messing with their belief system. And, you know, if something happens, you know, like that will relate to a higher knowledge, then I will say something to them. But not until they either ask or a situation happens that they can make sense of what's going on. And that there has to be something more than just Jesus in the Bible because of the situation and the circumstances. And then they'll listen. But they won't listen, you know, while you're just sitting there trying to get in their face and tell them what's going on. That's not going to happen.
Yes, it would be like reverse proselytizing.
Yep.
So what would you tell people in summary who may think there is no purpose here, for example?
Well, everybody's here for a reason. You're fulfilling a destiny that was that was you before you were ever born, and you pick the body and the life and the people that you're going to be with that will help you to achieve what it is you need to fulfill your little puzzle piece, more or less, your karma thing. So yeah, my only advice is totally believe there's something higher, something bigger. That crossing over is a beautiful thing. I mean, the horrible thing is just before you cross over and the pain, you know, like if you're in a car wreck or a heart attack or whatever, there's that minute or so of absolute terrible pain, and then all of a sudden it's gone. So, and then when you look around and you see everything and you feel everything, you can be anything you want to be, you know. I mean, it's all there. It's just you. And everything that there is and everybody that there is you. You're all part of it. And they're all part of you. So my advice is don't be scared. Don't be afraid. You know, I mean, I'm not saying go out and commit suicide. No. Not that. Don't do that. But enjoy your life. And then you'll have certain things happen in your life. And I call them speed bumps. Because there'll be things that you go, oh, I can't handle this. This is way too much, da-da-da. And you think, I'm just going to avoid it. Well, don't avoid it, because if you do, it'll just happen to you again. So hit it head on and do it to the best of your ability. And then pat yourself on the back and go on. And then wait for the next fate bump. Because each lifetime has so many fate bumps in it that you have to achieve. If you don't, you're going to do it again in another lifetime or even in this lifetime later on. So everything in between your fate bumps, just kick it and have fun, enjoy it, be kind to people, love people. Know that there's a superior being, or not a being, but a superior energy, a God, a source, or whatever you want to call it. And know that it's there and it's guiding you if you just listen. You have to listen to it. It's not just going to come and slap you upside the head and say, hey, do this. You have to be quiet. You have to quiet yourself so that your spirit, the God part of you, can connect to that, the big piece of God. And that's what Jesus and Muhammad, all these holy people, they had a direct line. They knew how to connect that little piece, that little spark, that little energy thing. They knew how to connect that with the master puzzle, the master soul, the master source, God, you know. They knew how to connect directly to that. So, you know, find your way mentally and find your way emotionally how to connect that little piece of God to the bigger part.
Priceless advice there. Tell us, what's the title of your book and where can we find it?
It's called My Journey After Death. I Saw the Other Side. But it won't be out for a while.
I'll be certain to check back with you to determine when and where that book will be available. And with that said, Alice, I want to thank you for coming on and sharing your highly informative near-death experience here on Real Spiritual Talk Radio.
Oh, you are so welcome. This was a joy, and I thank you so much.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, Alice Adamek.